A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our audience who are joining from different parts of the world today for another session in the Sciative Knowledge Series. I'm Dr. Anshu Jalora and I'll be your host today. Before we start the session, I would like to make a quick mention. Jim Brown has written to us, thank you Sciative Knowledge Series for the wonderful sessions and amazing speakers. Very informative, thought-provoking and relevant for business users. Well, Thank you, Jim, for writing to us. We at Sciative Solutions are committed to bringing amazing speakers in the Sciative Knowledge Series. And along these lines, our speaker today is Todd Snellgrove. Did I say your name correct, Todd?
You did a very good job, sir.
Thank you. Todd is the Global Vice President of Value at SKF, a global industrial engineering company. He has developed and led SKF's initiatives to quantify customer value for over 16 years, price for value, communicate and sell value, and to procure based on best value. He is noted as a subject matter expert on value and has been published in various academic journals, been the keynote speaker at numerous global conferences, and supports executive MBA classes at schools such as Northwestern, London Business School, and IMD. Todd, it's indeed an honor for us to have you as a speaker today.
Well, thank you first of all for having me. And again, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I'm in Canada. I'm a Canadian in the Eastern time zone, just outside Toronto. I was supposed to have a professor with me, Dr. Hinterhuber, from Switzerland. He's been unable to make it, but I have all of his information and we've worked closely together on a lot of research that I would like to share. Hopefully you can see my screen, and just like to talk a little bit about the subject title that you see there.
Todd, just a quick note for the audience. Audience, you can follow and post your comments on Twitter using hashtag Sciative and hashtag Andreas. Towards the end, as time permits, we will take questions posted by the audience on Twitter. Remember to put hashtag Sciative and hashtag Andreas in your tweets. Now today, Todd will be sharing his views on value first then price. The information he'll be sharing and the importance of putting value before price cannot be stated enough. Well, thank you, Todd, for speaking on this very important topic today, and we look forward to hearing your views. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, I was thinking, we believe that value pricing, or pricing for value created, fits in a much bigger ecosystem. It starts by your company creating something that is of value, not what your engineers or your technical people think is of value, but what the customer values. And once you create value with new products and new services, all the research shows that if you can calculate that value, the ability to pay and the willingness to pay for the customer goes up. If it's hard return on investment, people will find the money to buy your solution versus somebody else's because it rises in priority and the payback is there. And then sales and marketing needs to communicate that value. And I used to say, then you capture value. So one, it would be 4 C's, creating, calculating, communicating. If you do all that, you need to capture value. Dr. Jalora had mentioned that I do some work with Kellogg. There's a gentleman named Professor Jim Anderson, known as the value merchant in the world. And he challenged me with that. He says, the problem with the word capture is it reinforces procurement's mindset that it's a zero-sum game, that every time you increase your price, the customer is getting less value. And we're constantly fighting over this small area. A lot of research, and I'll share some of it with you today, shows that both the sell side can capture value by pricing that value, but procurement can make more value for their company by choosing the right supplier, not on lowest price, but on best value. At the very top of your screen, you'll see a term you've probably never heard of because we've just started using it, called total profit added. The generally accepted term is total cost of ownership. And I'll explain that in a little minute, the stages, etc. But it's a holistic measurement that says, where are the costs and where are the benefits? And total cost of ownership usually just looked at the cost drivers. But we believe you should be making a purchasing decision on what solution or supplier can bring the most profit. Yes, you might pay more for a product or service than an alternative, But if it brings you more value, cost reduction, and revenue increase, that's a better decision. So we want customers to start making that decision based on total profit added, not lowest price. One slide on SKF. This is applicable to all industries. I work in the industrial marketplace, work for a 108-year-old, 109-year-old company called SKF, Swedish. A few interesting things here, I think, from the pricing side, but also from our sales and our procurement side. We started with bearings. Really quickly, anything that turns has a bearing in it. It's designed to reduce friction. So the airplanes that we all fly on, the big aero engines, have very high precision bearings in them. Paper machines, gearboxes, fans, anything that turns. But around 20, 30 years ago, management realized that we should stop looking in a vacuum to just a product, a bearing, that customers should look holistically based on an asset. Who can come to me and make that asset, that train you see on the right, or that fan, or that car, run the best, create the most value? So instead of buying 100 widgets and then 100 something else, but look holistically, who can come in here and make that asset create the most value for me? That's who I should choose. So we widen our horizons around just the product, but more towards the total asset. And I think a really interesting evolution for the company was around 3-4 years ago when management said, what is our mission in life? What do we need to do? What do we need to bring to the marketplace? So it's to take our knowledge on industries and applications and markets, we're in every market of the world, but we believe if we make our customers more profitable than the alternatives they have, we can be more profitable. Again, not a zero-sum game, but more holistically. So the stories, examples are a very short part of a new book that was just released on Friday, I believe, called Value First, Then Price. And I've worked with Dr. Hinterhuber on this. And the title says on the right-hand side, it's Quantifying Value in Business-to-Business Markets. It works on the consumer side. We can touch on that later. But what I think is interesting, it's from both the buyer side and the seller side. And on the buyer side, you have the engineering that creates the value. You have sales that's trying to communicate that value. You have pricing that sets what that value should be in the price point that's supposed to be realized. So that's the price setting. Sales job is to get that price. So the price getting. And sometimes those are different. The price that was set versus the price that was gotten. But it all comes back down to what's procurement's view of what the value you're delivering versus the price difference you're charging. So we won't go through all the examples here, but from a marketing, you'll see Ralph Olivia in the middle. You'll see a marketing professor at the top, talk a really bit, in the Pricing Professional Society, Kevin Mitchell at the bottom, talking about all this needs to come together. Sales, marketing, and pricing, new product development, and holistically look, what do we do that's worth more? How do we price for that so that procurement is willing and able to pay for it? A side comment here, in my market and in every market that we've researched, from medical to services, the power of procurement has increased. That is okay. The technical buyer doesn't have as much authority as they used to. The procurement professionals do, but they're willing to pay more for something better if it's tangible value. So if your price point is 20% higher than somebody else's, using vague terms of better, quicker, more reliable doesn't have the same meaning to them as what dollars and cents can you bring to my bottom line? Again, not by a lower price, but really creating value for me. So the examples are from this book that's just been released. I start off every presentation, and it's interesting whether I'm on my customer side, so with my key account team, with our people introducing a new product, or on our buying side, because I work also on the procurement side of SKF, is making sure that people are using the terms correctly. And people transpose them constantly. It doesn't matter what market you are in. Price is what you pay for something, and 100 euros, $10. Cost is the price plus all the associated cost of acquiring that product or service. That would get you to landed cost. So terms and conditions, shipping cost, receiving cost. But then when you look through the life cycle of the product or service, there's other costs. How much energy will that machine use? How quick can I fix that machine? Does it cost me more to install? So I think it's very important to say, which one of these numbers should I look at? The price or the cost? Again, price is part of cost, but it's only part of it. Value on the other side is the upside that you create for a customer. It might not be reducing something, it might be increasing something. And I'll get to more specifics in a minute. But I am amazed at a few things. One, people assume that if the price they pay for something goes down, that their costs will go down. That is an assumption. I prefer guarantees in life. If the cost goes down, those savings will hit the bottom line. A lower price does not mean that those savings will get to the bottom line. I can specifically give you an example of 70 different articles, magazine things that the SCAF's been involved in where we've used the wrong term. So if your sales force comes back to you and says, pricing leadership, our price is too high, I think we need to ask ourselves, is the price too high, or have we articulated the total cost of our solution versus somebody else's? And the only way to do that is to walk through the life of the product or service and see how it affects your customer. So I don't want to make assumptions about price reductions being profit. I want to deal with hard facts and say cost or value. The difference between the two is where we should focus our time and energy on. All things being equal. Ceteris paribus is a Latin saying. Even though maybe the two laptops are the exact same, how you get it, how you install it, how you use it will affect much more of the total cost than the price of the widget to begin with. A visual example, and as I had mentioned, I'll revert to my world, but this is applicable to anything. So as a procurement person, let's put ourselves on that side of the equation for a second. There are two products or services, and we're looking at two right here. One is a $10, again, it can be any number, and there's usually a low price one and then a different one. In this case, the one on the right is 50% higher price than the one on the left. And in the world I live in, we have ISO specifications. So they both look the same, they feel the same, they have the same functionality. It should fit in the same hole. But through our research, internally working on our factories or as we create new products and services, we've been able to realize that making the price decision by the one on the left that's cheaper might not be the lowest cost. So as an example, and again, this is specific on customer and which solution we're talking about, so this is just an overview. We know there's 482 other possible costs or benefits associated with industrial equipment, bearings being at the heart of that. And again, the engineers need to explain the how and the why, but let's start with some assumptions here. The one on the left could use more lubricant. You need lubricant to make the machine turn. Energy, if the machine's aligned, it uses less energy. If you use a special bearing that has less friction. So the one on the left, it's got price, and it's got all these other costs and maybe benefits. And the one on the right, either because of the product or service, or the services around that product, will use less lubricant, be faster to install, last longer, whatever those possible benefits are to start with. If we were talking to another engineer, they could do a calculation subconsciously in their head and say, more reliable, that's worth something to me. Procurement, buy the more reliable one. But when I use those terms to professional procurement, they don't know what those terms mean. And they're saying, I understand dollars and cents, euros, yen. So instead of giving that as the end point of our discussion with the customers, we need to support them and say, actually, the one on the left, in general, we believe cost $87 over the life of the product, 10 in price, $77 in operating cost. The one on the right, yes, a higher price, but its total costs are less. And I'll come back to how you can support that in a minute. The difference being value. In this case, $30, the difference between the two options. In my world, they have to buy a bearing. It's just whose will they buy? They have to buy a seal. Whose will they buy? If you're in the position of selling something that the customer might need or doesn't need, you compare it to the next best alternative. But in my case, it's the difference between the two. One thing that I think is interesting, I present a quarter of my time doing procurement research, procurement conferences, and I ask the question here, takeaway for your colleagues within marketing and strategy within your organization. In general, when I ask an audience, what would you call the brand on the right-hand side? There's always one brand in every market that has a price leadership position. And usually after some thinking and talking, people come back and say, well, the one on the right is the premium brand. And I can tell you from my experience globally, procurement people hate the word premium. It connotates to them, they're paying a higher price for something, for a feeling, for a logo, for something that doesn't have tangible value, just subjective value. Once I'm able to put these numbers here, I want to position my offering as an investment. I'm asking you to pay 50% more, but that $5 investment generates $30 in return. Again, 600% return on investment. Customers can then ask me, where has this happened before? What's the probability it will happen again? How will we measure if it's happened or doesn't happen? How do I pay you if it happens or doesn't happen? Those are all closing questions and leads into all the programs and services we have around that to maybe guarantee and some other ideas, which I'll come to in a minute. So as pricing, when you're pricing your product, you're talking about the benefit it brings to customers. If you can quantify it, you can get a better idea of what that really is worth and maybe charge different industries different amounts based on that value. The Priceberg, the visual I think is great. The concept has been around forever. The iceberg, but I like my colleague put this together, the Priceberg. Yes, Mr. Customer, you can see the price. It's visible. It's staring you right at the face, in front of your face right now. But everything you buy or use, product or service in any industry, has other benefits or cost. Again, I believe it's the product management side, the supplier side, to enumerate what these are, and they won't be the same benefits for every country or industry or company, but to enumerate them and then put numbers into the calculation. And really, whoever's got the smallest Priceberg is going to create the most profit added. So I mentioned this term total profit added, which is really just an evolution of total cost of ownership. And I want to walk you through the model, which, like I said, can be applied to numerous industries. I'll use industrial examples to begin with, but I can explain that we see this in the medical industry now. Total cost of patient care is a term that's used, but it's trying to look at the holistic cost of treating a person over a period of time. I see it in the renewable energy world, solar industry, nuclear power. There they call it the levelized cost of energy. What are my total costs to build, run, and operate whatever I'm doing? Solar panels, wind turbines, versus how many kilowatts do I produce, generates a price per kilowatt. So in my world, and again, we can apply this to any other world, including consumer, it starts with somebody building a product. They take a bunch of parts, a bunch of engineers, and say, okay, we're going to take these things and put it together to make a tractor, to make an excavator, to make a car, to make a mobile phone. So those engineers and product development people are usually sitting in a room and they're getting feedback from their sales and marketing people in the marketplace saying, build a product or service that does this. And more what they're hearing coming back from the field is, don't make a better whatever product or service. The customer is willing to pay this amount, this threshold. So build something that meets that price point. And that's based on the assumption of what the value will be. Therefore, the design engineers, etc., build the product or service saying, making trade-offs. Engineers, if they had no budget, could build something that would last forever. But there's a trade-off between it lasting forever and the price that needs to be charged. So they're making design trade-offs, tolerance trade-offs, these things. The words you see in green are the things that have been added to this definition of total profit added that some academics have worked on with us over the years. But maybe the OEM should say, maybe if I could build a product that's better for my customer, as an example, uses less energy, or I can predict when it will fail so it's cheaper to fix. I can use this as a differentiator to increase my sales, increase my price. What's the value of getting your product, your customer's product or service quicker to the marketplace? In the drug industry, it's everything. You have so many years of patent protection. If you can extend that by helping the manufacturer speed up the delivery of that new patented drug to the marketplace, it's worth everything. Imagine you're in the mobile phone market. If you could help a mobile phone manufacturer, a Samsung, an Apple, whatever, get to market quicker, that'd be worth a lot. So you have somebody that builds something, this is when procurement gets involved. Now, procurement's asked on behalf of their organization, buy us 1,000 cars, 1,000 gearboxes, 1,000 laptops. So years ago, when my CEO asked me to work with our procurement team, there was an initial discussion saying, Todd, we already buy in total cost of ownership to make the best value decision for our company. So the question was, what do we measure? I'm not saying these things are unimportant, but I want to give you a framework to look at it in. Terms, conditions, and unit price is what we were looking at. What's the price to the product or service? What are the terms? What's the minimum order quantity? What are the taxes? Are there shipping costs? Are there currency exchanges I have to worry about? What's the return policy? These are very important things, but over time, procurement started to look at a few other things. One is, am I making a decision that's right based on risk? There's a lot of risk in the marketplace. I want my supply to be close to where my customer is. What about sustainability? I don't want to be the manufacturer that's using child labor somewhere. That'll kill my brand. I won't go through numerous examples that's happened to. So procurement's starting to expand how they measure the acquisition phase, but they're also starting to open up that a lot more of the costs will occur during the operation phase. So somebody built something, somebody bought something. Now, usually what happens, and this will be different for every industry you're in, but hopefully with this model, you can challenge your people. In my world, the machine gets installed, operated, and maintained. And with that, it has a bunch of different costs. How much energy will it use? How much lubricant will it use? How long will it last? If I take the machine before it breaks, can I refurbish it at a lower price point? Is there value to that? Does this machine affect my production? So these are on the upside calculations. The yield of my product or service. My maintenance cost to manage it because of the reliability. And if the machine doesn't work according to the agreement, warranty costs go back to the OEM. And finally, most of the research on quantifying overall customer value does not look at disposal cost. The assumption has been that there are no disposal costs. You take it and you throw it away. Well, I think our research internally and externally has shown that this can be a huge thing to look at. I started looking at this because of the lubricant consumption side of our business. Lubricant people told me the cost to dispose of used lubricant is 2.5 times the price to buy the lubricant. Now that's a rule of thumb. It'd be different for different industries, different countries, but as a non-engineer, I like rules of thumb. If I knew that, maybe I should have bought a machine that doesn't require as much lubricant to begin with. Another thing to think of, if you happen to be in the automobile industry or capital equipment, big excavators or something, really you're looking at the cost to acquire it, the price for the product, the financing, the delivery, those costs. How much does it cost to run the machine? But instead of it being disposal, there's usually a resale value. And John Deere, Caterpillar, just as examples, know what their machine will be worth in 10 years. They do a lot of research on this. So they're saying my price and the acquisition phase might be higher, but the value of the machine, 8 years depreciated, is worth more. There's actually the lower difference between the acquisition and disposal phase. And you can see a visual there that looks at the different phases. And what's interesting is to find out where those costs are so that we can price for the value accordingly. One great piece of research is from a global consulting organization called Accenture. This is about a decade old now, but the numbers still hold true. They looked at 4 different segments in the world. So this is global data they used. And I'm going to quickly explain what this means first, and then I'll walk you through it a little bit. So on the far left-hand side, you're going to see a kind of a gold-orange color that has 92%, and then a red color, which is 8%. If you were to buy a new airplane today, as an example, an Airbus or a Boeing or a Bombardier, that would constitute only 8% of the total cost. The price you paid, whatever that is only 8%. 92% of that plane's cost will come during the operation phase of it and the maintenance phase. Salaries for the flight people associated with it, the maintenance cost, the depreciation, and most importantly, the fuel. So I'm going to go through a few examples and I'm going to bring this back to pricing. Class 8 trucks are big 18-wheelers. the big international trucks, the MAN, Scania, the big ones that haul things. Industrial equipment, fans, gearboxes, etc. And on the far right-hand side, light-duty pickup trucks. This includes labor, so it's not a personal vehicle. This is having a foreman drive a truck around, as an example. I'll focus on the industrial equipment because that's where my background is. But SKF, as a procuring organization, we would look at that price that we were being offered 100-something machines at, and it was a big number, it was visible, and people would work very hard to say, okay, should we try to pay less for that? And the question I ask is, what's more important, a 10% more expensive piece of equipment that has 2% less operating cost? So in the industrial equipment example, a 10% better piece of equipment that has all these benefits would constitute a 1.2% price increase over the total cost of that asset, 10% of 12. But a 2% operating cost reduction, it uses less energy, it lasts longer, whatever those things are, 2% of 88, 0.88 plus 0.88 is 1.76. We were looking at the wrong number. We should be concerned about making the 88% go down, not the 12%. So I think pricing needs to challenge the marketing people saying, it's great you've told us that my product or service is better than somebody's. We need some sample ranges of data to see what is it worth for that customer, because we can price set all we want, but if we don't equip our teams to price get, it doesn't work. Some best practices to buy this way. Again, you set the price. Is the market willing to pay a price premium? Every pricing professional I know tells me that their sales and marketing people are coming back saying, don't increase the price, lower the price. I believe that's because of our inability to articulate the value to the customer, not in a vacuum in and of itself. A very interesting piece of research to think around. This was only brought to my attention maybe 5 years ago by one of the authors in the book, a gentleman named Robert McGuire, who's a procurement professional. So sales and pricing and marketing would sit in a room and come up with all these strategies, but we never bothered to think, how does procurement buy from us? How do they segment us? How can they treat me on a price down point of view? So a gentleman named Peter Kraljic in 1983 wrote an article for Harvard Business Review, a seminal article that began the evolution of purchasing. Purchasing must become supply chain management, must become procurement. Just a side note, the first MBA in procurement in the world was 1992 or 1993. 20 years ago when I started, procurement didn't report to the chief executive office. In a lot of companies they do, they have a chief procurement officer. They're strategic, they're important, and they think differently than maybe we do. They will take every supply bucket, office supplies, industrial parts, corporate travel, legal services, whatever it is they buy, and they will put them into one of these 4 boxes, and they will treat you differently and focus on what you charge them, the price and everything else, differently. And their spend is based on the percentage to them, not how big that customer is to you. So they will take all their spend buckets, all these disparate things, and put them in a XY graph and say where the big ones are on the right, the small ones are on the left. It'll be different for every industry, but if you're small dollar to them and you're easily substitutable, the risk is low that they can't switch to somebody else, price becomes the major component. They can substitute easily. There's no risk or perceived little risk to the business in a switch. And they will do things like reverse auctions, price downs, annual price reductions, all the things that become very price focused because they believe price is 90% of the cost. Remember, this is their perception. On the low dollar spend, but the high risk is if you happen to be in the marketplace where you create something that the customer can't get somewhere else. And stop and think of that and be honest with yourself. Do you hold a patented product or chemical or something the customer has to have? Or could they easily substitute what you do to somebody else? Your salespeople might say no, but from the procurement person on the other side of the aisle, it's their perception. If you're really big dollars to them, usually your direct materials, for SKF raw steel as an example. If you're really big dollars, but the perception is low risk, you put them into the bottom right and you leverage. And finally, the mantra that we all shoot for is to be a strategic partner, where price is only a small part of the discussion, where you're big dollars and you can have big contributions. The question I ask people is, I think the problem, the way the slide's been interpreted over the years, is the x-axis shouldn't be spend. It should be profit. Should procurement spend all their time taking a $100 million buy, trying to reduce it by $1 million, switching it to somebody else? Or the $10 million supplier that could take $5 million of cost out or value improvement by looking at elsewhere? 5 million is bigger than 1 million, but they're looking at the denominator always. So we need to have that data point to say, wait, I know that you're focused on my price because you think that I'm in this bucket. However, if we came in and did a holistic look, here's where we could truly create value. And therefore, the price I charge you is a rounding error versus the big profitability impact I can have. I think close to the last slide, this is one that I use and love very much. MAPI is an organization that SKF belongs to. It's a big industrial conglomerate. So a big industrial manufacturers alliance for productivity and innovation, think tank, global. So big industrial companies belong to it. They asked all the procurement people of member companies, do you have a structured methodology to buy on total cost of ownership? And if you remember that slide earlier that had the 4 stages, those were the questions. Do you measure energy, refurbishment, yield, production? Companies that did were 35% more profitable than companies that did not. That's not by buying a cheaper product, but by choosing the right one and the right service. By buying the best value one, they can be 35% more profitable. And these are just organizations that I've done research with over the last 16 years that have come to the same conclusion. On the left-hand side, you'll see a bunch of global, large academic institutions, that some focusing specifically on value pricing, our London Business School, Assad, and Kellogg's around marketing a lot, INSEAD's in France around marketing. Out of interest, University of Tennessee and North Carolina, they're both American, but I teach at their MBA procurement schools with the same discussion. How do we buy best value? Procurement associations, the second column on the left here, goes through and sees, so government procurement at the beginning, the second one's Asia, Brazil, etc. My point is procurement around the world is starting to think differently, that maybe the lowest price isn't what they should be focusing on, the best value. Governments changing their rules of how they buy, and finally some consultants saying, okay, value pricing is based on creating other value that's measurable for customers. Are we doing okay, Doctor?
Yeah, we are doing wonderful. In fact, lots of amazing lessons from your session today. Do you have more slides to cover, or are we done?
No, we're getting there. We're getting there. I've got to probably, I think, just give me a few minutes. I believe we're getting to the pricing part of it now.
Okay.
So just again, this to close with the procurement section, just 2 procurement professors kind of reinforcing we'd be making based on lowest price, but they should be making it on best value. So from the profiting side, I talked about measuring customers' value. We have developed a tool that we've been using for 15 years, and not everyone, but most of our products and services are in this system that allows our people to calculate what is the value for that specific customer to implement a product or service using their numbers, what they value, and their local information, and saying, okay, yes, the price might be higher, but the value exceeds the price. And when you were in school or doing your pricing strategy things, we all know there's this thing called ZOPA, Zone of Possible Agreement. And it's based on what the customer perceives the value of your offering versus your marginal cost. to produce one extra item. And it depends on where the perceived power is in that relationship. If the buyer perceives they have power, they will push you as hard as they can towards your marginal cost. If there's a power balance, they need you, you need them, somewhere in the middle. And if you have a leg up on everybody else, there's power there. The issue here is you can see the top bar is always based on perceived value. And perceived value versus realized value are two different numbers. Again, if you can quantify that value and measure it for the customer, they're looking for the difference between what is the value for me versus what do I pay. So instead of reducing the price, it's increasing either the realized value or the perceived value by measuring it, the economic value. So within our world, if we're creating a new product or service, we run a bunch of what if scenarios. What would this product or service do for that industry, that country? And you'll get a bunch of different areas of possible numbers depending on, do they care about downtime? Do they care about labor? But you get a range of profit impact for the customer. Then we should look at what's our cost to produce. And I can be honest, a decade ago, cost plus pricing and competitive based pricing were the focus. Now it's what's the range of value for the customer versus the next best alternative, cost to produce. If there's a large enough magnitude to move forward, it makes sense. A lot of value pricing books will talk about extracting the full value created. The difference between what you charge and what the customer perceives as the value is called the value surplus. I'm quoting some of the work by Jim Anderson from Kellogg, but it's the incentive to buy your product or service. If I set the price, in this case, at $11.75, everybody that perceives it worth more than that versus alternatives, that's a buy decision. What we want to do then, after initial price point is set, is say, Mr. Customer, we can actually increase that value for you by doing certain things, or did you realize it was really worth this? The more we can do this, the more we can increase price over time as the customer is looking at the difference between what's the value he gets versus what's the price that he pays. It's the relative difference between the two. So there you go, Dr. Anjou, Laura, the final thoughts. So I tell people from a procurement side, challenge your suppliers to say, where will you find savings? Who will do it? How will you measure it? Does the supplier really believe it? And we didn't cover this, but the willingness for the supplier to get paid based on value. I believe this is one of the next frontiers. We have some agreements with customers that say, fine, you'll pay us X now, but if this value is created, you will pay us Y or more. Or pay us this up front, and if we don't hit these KPIs, we will write you a check. I believe the world is getting more accepting of these ideas of pay for performance. How will you do it? Where have you done it? And some examples. And I think as we get to the very end, this is a great piece of research to use with your own company internally. It comes from Monitor, which is now part of Deloitte Consulting. They looked at the profitability of every industry and said we should compare the profitability within that industry. So drug manufacturers to drug, high tech to high tech, because your profitability should be compared to your direct competitors. They said, we'll make the average one, because we're looking for a ratio here. And the term on the left, they say value-based pricing. But talking to the authors of it, it's really a value strategy. You can't value price unless there's something of value that your customer perceives as value. But if you take the value strategy, pricing the leading that, you can be 24% more profitable if you're good at it than the industry average. I think almost comically, even if you're not good at it, but saying we're going to be the value person, not the discount person, 4% better than the average. What's really interesting are people that there's always one in every industry. We'll make it up in volume, we'll load the factories, we'll make it up in market share. If you're really good, you have a strong execution in that strategy, you're 9% less profitable than the average. If you try to take the volume strategy, but you're not good at it, you're more profitable. You're only 7% less profitable than the average. Think about that afterwards. So what it says here, you have a strategy to say, take the value approach or take the volume approach. The difference between the two, 0.91 and 1.24, is about 36%. I mentioned earlier, procurement can make more money for their company by buying on best value, Sales and pricing can help their companies make more value by taking the value strategy. It's not a zero-sum game. So with that, the information is going to be saved for you. Your colleagues can look at it on the Sciative website here. And these two white papers will be available also on the website for distribution. The one on the left is written by University of Tennessee from a procurement perspective about you should pay better or a higher price for better value. The one on the right is an SKF white paper. And as we come into questions now, I think on the pricing side and the buying side, it's about focusing on the total profit added. So as I close, and we'll leave this slide up, price is only ever an issue in the absence of value. The value needs to be quantified. The more you can quantify it, the more you can stand up behind it, the higher part of it you can get. So challenge your sales and marketing people that's where the effort should be on, not in realizing the price getting component of the sales equation. So with that, questions, comments, opinions?
Well, thank you, Todd, for such an amazing session today. I think you've covered some very relevant topics. You introduced this concept of total profit added vis-a-vis total cost of ownership, and procurement teams should focus on what is the total profit added with purchasing items from a specific vendor, and not just purely focus on total cost of ownership. While total cost of ownership is important because we might be dealing with a price per, right?
Yeah.
Where might only have a visibility of a very small portion of the costs upfront, and there could be lots of hidden costs underneath. Very interesting term and very relevant topic. You emphasized on quantifying the value being delivered to the customers repeatedly. Now, one question I would like to ask you here is that for a company like SKF, which is 109 years old and it's a global leader in its product, it's probably very easy for it to convince its customers because it has several proven success stories in the past where it has delivered substantial value to customers, and most of the customers would easily accept the value stories that are being given by SKF. But what about new startups, companies that have come up with new differentiated products? Their products are not yet proven in the market, although on paper their things look amazingly good. How should these new companies that do not have success stories yet go with value selling?
A great question, and that's a great topic as itself to discuss. Let me first say, from an SKF standard, yes, 109 years old, but we only started quantifying customer value 13, 14, 15 years ago. So as I say to everybody, a journey starts with one step, one case. So for all of you out there, you have success stories and I'll come and answer your question in a minute, but you start small, start with a product or service, get good at that, and eventually over time, it widens and the depth gets better. I think for new products in new markets where there isn't a history, one is to be willing to get paid based on that value. So, Mr. Customer, we believe that it could create this value for you. That's a belief, that's an assumption. I'm going to take more risk than I normally would. I'm going to come in and install this product or service, and I suggest that I get paid $100 now, but as these key performance indicators are hit, I get paid part of the value created. I find that being willing to get paid based on value makes the customer much more believable in your value. You're both got skin in the game, as the saying goes. I even find customers say, well, but if your product or service does all the things you say, I could end up paying you this huge number. Actually, the price you told me then is much smaller. So being willing and able to get paid based on the actual delivery of value, I believe, is a great step to do at the beginning. And at least in my world, every time we have a new product or service during test markets, before we started this process, a lot of times our test marketing information, we didn't quantify what was actually happening. So while you're going through that testing phase, make sure you're collecting the data. What did it do? And then what was that worth? So one, be willing to get paid on the future value, put some skin in the game, put a risk reward partnership. And then two, make sure you're collecting data all the way along.
Well, great advice. Start small, do some test marketing, and go for pay for performance, which is actually a very debatable, which is a topic that gets debated a lot.
Hmm.
But in this case, I think it's the right approach to take, where you put your skin in the game, you convey to the customers that yes, I have full confidence in the value that my product or service will deliver, and I'm willing to take a bet. Absolutely.
And like I said, a lot of big companies will say, well, we don't want to get into that model for this size of a product or service. But by you standing there with the conviction that you're willing to get paid, it adds credibility to it. And just throw another comment on there, not to take us off topic, but variable pay for performance, I think in the last few years is starting to show up on the consumer side of the world much more. Everybody realizes when you get on an airplane, everybody paid something different. So as long as people are comfortable knowing the pricing model and that it's transparent, they're much more open to it. I hate to use a North American example, Uber's global now, but if I book something in advance, book minimum order quantities, I might pay less. But if I want flexibility and last minute, I pay more. As long as you give the customer those two options, they seem to be much happier seeing that it's a clear and concise choice they're making.
So basically, keeping all the transactions and proceedings very transparent is key to the success of pay for performance types of models. Absolutely right. Now, repeatedly you've mentioned quantifying the value delivered. Isn't it based on the frame of reference? Who's looking at it? So if a seller is quantifying the value, probably the seller will overstate the value. And if the buyer is quantifying the value, it will understate the value. And again, different companies might have different value delivered. So any standard models you would like to recommend here, where companies can take a systematic approach in quantifying value rather than trying to figure out the nuances with every individual customers, which can actually become very difficult to do?
Yes, and I'm not sure the best way to get that information to you. I know of a few consultants that actually have software. And let me just back up for a second. The calculation for energy savings is the same everywhere in the world. I'm not going to go through it because I don't remember it, but it's kilowatts and amps and these things. But the number that you put into the calculation changes on which country you're in or the source of energy. And if you value it, changes. Is energy a small part of your business or a big part of your business? So the calculations should be the same everywhere in the world. The numbers used would be different and the impact would be different. What we try to do with customers is get ranges to use to begin with. And again, with having so much data over time, you can start being prescriptive. The average downtime is this, the average is this. But when we started off, it's sitting with customers ahead of time. If you're going to get paid based on performance, you need to agree ahead of time of what will be measured and how it will be measured, so that all you're doing afterwards is checking a box. Don't wait to the end to make that discussion, because then it's even more obvious that one person's going to try to make it really high and the other person's going to try to make it very low. Just a final comment there. If the customer believes that the more they accept your value, the higher price they will pay, they of course will diminish the value. We don't care about this or care about this. So having a model ahead of time with the drivers, Dr. Jarora, what I think I can do is maybe give you a few links to some consultants that have software. One that SKF used is an American professor named Tim Underhill. We'll talk about after how do we get that information to your members so that they can look at that structured software.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Another related question I have in mind is, there are many companies who are not doing value selling. They do mostly cost plus selling or follow the competition type of selling, right? And you'll probably agree with that. Now, for a company of this type, or for a vendor who has been operating in a cost plus mode for many years, and let's say they hear your presentation and they get very impressed with value selling and they want to adopt value selling, how should they get started?
That's a great question, and I actually have, maybe I can send you the slide also. I have a 10-step process for that, but a few things. One, to get the management buy-in, to get the CEO buy-in that says, what's our differentiator as an organization? What will that be long-term? And I can't always become the next best alternative, cheaper person. So getting the CEO excited that if we could actually create value and prove it, we could price for it. And I think all the pricing professionals online know what every percent of price means. One story that my old CEO used to say is, and it's a great question to ask your CEO, how many ways within your company do you have to discount? And I'm amazed at how creative salespeople can get when it comes to discounting. There's 100 programs to discount. How many ways do you have to guarantee and prove to the customer that you'll create and deliver that value? Usually it's very heavily weighted to the discount side and very few there. And then the CEO can ask, am I spending my right resources on the right spot? So that's point one. Point two, and I don't think this is just for my company, I think you need a champion in place. Pricing are the experts on picking the number, but a value strategy as an organization needs to be a living, breathing thing. That's why you see myself, the book has a bunch of examples of a bunch of industrial examples of companies that have put somebody in charge. They work with the pricing people. They work with the marketing people. They work with the new product people and say, okay, how do we pull this all together into one big strategy that says, what is our value? So have somebody drive the program, get upper management support, and then show management how much dollars this will bring to your company's bottom line by taking this strategy. That monitor Deloitte slide that I used towards the end that shows being the best at the value strategy makes you 35% more profitable than the industry average. That's usually a great slide to get the questions started. And maybe I can also send Dr. Jalura a slide that I have these 10 steps associated with it. It's in the book also, but I mean, either way, I'll figure a way to get you some information you can share with your members.
That would be wonderful. I'm now going to take questions posted by the audience on Twitter. So we have a question posted by Sheetal, and she would like to know, in heavily competitive markets where price is the main focus of all the participants, all the sellers, what should be the focus, value or pricing?
Well, that's a great question, and just to let you know, the industrial bearing market globally is extremely competitive. There are 5 major global players that all range between 5 billion in sales and 10 billion in sales, and all the products are ISO. So they look the same, they smell the same. 2 things. One quick comment that was made to me by a procurement professor once. He said, customers confuse what ISO means. You think it means it's a standard product or service. ISO means a product or service conforms to something. Doesn't mean it'll perform to something. So it's about getting the customer to think differently, to reframe. And that's one of the reasons I get phone calls a lot to go to conferences and speak, because most people would look at a bearing and say, that's a commodity. Number one. Number two, the value might not be the product. It's what you do around the product and service. In my world, the best bearing in the world or the worst bearing in the world doesn't matter if it wasn't installed properly, if it wasn't maintained properly, if it wasn't lubricated, all these other things. So Jim Anderson from Kellogg's makes a very good point. It's the services and systems and support around the product where the differentiation and value could be. A lot of industries that are extremely competitive have started adding on consulting services to their product or service. It's not the product, it's how you use it is really where the value gets created and extracted.
Great, absolutely right. It's not just about the product, but how in what application the product is being used, and the entire, so to say, service system around the product that really determines whether the value will be realized or not. Absolutely correct. Uh, I think we have a repetition of a question. What should be the focus of a startup, value or price? And I think you've already answered that question. And we have a very India-centric question.
I'm just going to ask to answer that. There will always be somebody that can create a product or service almost as good, cheaper. So you've got to find a way to make it better and get paid for it. If you don't get paid for it, that doesn't work. But you've got to choose which side you want to be on.
Absolutely. So we have a very India-centric question from Kamaljit, and he would like to know, is Apple putting value or price to Indian customers? I'm not sure if you're aware about the Indian smartphone market, and I don't know, do you want to take a shot at this?
I will, and I have to mention one. I'm a Canadian, so there's a Canadian company that doesn't exist much anymore called BlackBerry that I believe used to be very big in India.
Yes.
And they had one of their very big benefits is that, again, I'm not an expert here, but I had friends that worked there. They use data much less than Apple or Google does. They could send the same thing over the same pipe 70 or 80% less, but they were never able to get the consumer or the company to value that. So they had something of value, less data bandwidth, but they never got it valued by the customer. And therefore, that's the biggest reason why they're in the situation they're in today. I don't know specifically, but I know that Apple has different price points all over the place. And they're trying to say, versus the next best alternative, what value do we offer? And then hopefully position it that way that you perceive you're getting more value by buying their phone versus somebody else's. But I think that leaves us with one final point. Values in the eyes of the beholder, and different people value different things. So I, as a business person, always want to frame my value as wide as I can and then customize it who I'm talking with. So if I'm talking to a consumer, if I'm talking to the CEO, if I'm talking to the user of the product, be able to reframe the value to what they understand and what they value.
Absolutely. And I think storytelling here becomes very important, right?
That's the big story. Yes, storytelling, exactly. That's exactly where it is.
Exactly. Well, it's been a great session taught today. It's been very enlightening. We have shared many interesting case studies and examples, and I'm sure many in the audience will take tips from your session today and will go back to their workplaces and will question the way their companies are pricing, and hopefully some of these companies will take the value-based selling approach. Not just value-based selling, but also value-based procurement, because you mentioned there are very few companies that do value-based procurement. Thank you so much, Todd.
You're welcome, and thank you, Sciative Knowledge, for the great series you put on. I wish everybody luck in creating value for their customers and getting paid for that value by pricing for it. So good luck.
Thank you. This knowledge series is being conducted by Sciative Solutions. Sciative helps companies compete and grow profitably through its scientific price optimization solutions and services. Please keep checking sciative.com for future sessions in the series. Our next session is on November 2nd at 5 p.m. Hong Kong time, which is 2:30 p.m. India time and 5 a.m. Eastern time, and our distinguished speaker will be Mike Sherman, and he'll be talking about 10 things I wish someone had told me about pricing. Thank you for joining today and look forward to seeing you in our future sessions. You can share your feedback at info@sciative.com. Have a good day. Bye-bye.